Hello and welcome, I am T, and I did want to go through something today that I think might be very useful for some of you out there. Now, Johnny Mo was kind enough to walk us through how to build out the prop sheet that he uses, where you're using SaberSim, Razzball, BatX, and things like that, and calculate out the average between those and go ahead and load those into the prop tool. One thing that you'll notice in Unabated is that they have the ability to blend values that they're automatically pulling in for you, and you have a nice little slider rail, and it's really easy. So what I would like to try and walk through is how can you do that with your own projections or your own file that you want to use. So say you have your own projections and you've got multiple other sources of information, and you want to go ahead and use that information into a single file that you can upload into Unabated. So what I'm going to walk through are a couple of different ways you can do this. You can do it with a simple formula. You can do it with a cool slider that is a basic form input. You can also do it with an ActiveX form input, which is a little bit more nicer and sleeker looking. The way that you choose to implement this does not really matter, but at the core of it, what you want to do is weight these averages. Now that is how you are going to blend this information to make sure that it's giving you a different value. So if you just take a standard average, that is useful, but it's not the best necessarily. Perhaps you believe that your information is more valuable than BatX or Raz or SaberSim or something like that. Or maybe you think BatX is more valuable than the other ones. That's where this blending mechanism will come in, and what you're doing effectively is you're blending based upon weighted averages. So before we dive into the spreadsheet, this is a similar replica to what Johnny Mo has. However, I did modify it slightly to be able to show how it would load if you're trying to do weighted averages and blending. Now, I did try and take a snapshot from the data that he was loading to use as a comparison tool so that you can kind of see apples to semi-apples, but they're not the exact same thing. I didn't have time to load up all the exact same data, but it hopefully is enough for you to understand. Enough of that, let's go ahead and dive into the Excel. Alright, so we are going ahead and take a look at blending. Now again, this setup is going to be very similar to the Johnny Mo setup that we saw earlier, where we have SaberSim info, we're going to have BatX info, and other information coming in. You also have your template. So all of that behavior is going to be the same thing. Now, the only difference that I have is that on the lookup sheet, you'll notice that I have some additional columns in here. So we have SaberSim strikeouts here, and then I have an additional column, and then I'm going to have BatX's strikeouts right here with an additional column. And this is the original averages that Johnny Mo is using, where he's combining the two and finding the average. And then I have a weighted average column over here. So let's go ahead and name this weight as well. So the way things work with a weighted average is that you're blending these combinations together. Now in this scenario, we are only using 2. Now you could do 3, 4, 5, however many you want. And then depending upon that, you would change out some of the formulas. So if you go to 3, you're going to want to change some of these formulas. If you go to 4, you got to change them. But right now, we're just going to say we want to compare these two right here. So we have our SaberSim strikeouts right here, and then we have weight. So when we look at weighted averages, all of your weights together, when you're going across a record, should equal 100% or 1. You never want to have above that, you never want to have below that, you always want to have it try and come out to a total of 1 or 100%. What I have is all of these cells below will all equal this value. This cell, I have 1 minus this weight, which again is the perfect way to make it always equal to 1 or 100%. Now if you want to do this with multiple variables and multiple types of weightings, you're going to have to go ahead and change the way some of your math works depending upon how you want to set those values, but it's a very similar behavior to this. So here we're going to say we're weighting BatX at 80%, and we're going to go ahead and weight SaberSim at 20%. Now, what you'll notice is that over here we have the standard average strikeouts at 6.7594. However, the weighted strikeouts is going to be 6.52788. Now, that doesn't look like a huge gap, and it's really not that big of a jump, However, you can start to see some of these differences show up later. Here we have 4.7, here we have 5.3. That's a pretty big swing. So weighted averages can cause swings at certain points depending upon which source of truth you think is more relevant. Again, the more you think that is relevant, the more weight you're going to put into it. But you don't want to just completely dismiss this information. So that's how weighting works. So when we want to set this up, I'm going to say there is a column that is called weighted average. And in here, we're going to go ahead and sum this information and then divide it by the sum of weights. So it sounds complicated. It's really not that bad. So in order to do this, what we want to do is we're going to sum the values times their weights. And in order to do that, we're going to use the formula of equals sum D2, which is our value, times its weight. And then we're going to put in a comma. And then the next value, F2 times its weight. And then we're going to go ahead and divide this value by the sum of our weights. And then that way it ensures everything is balanced. Now there is the possibility to use sum product, which is a Microsoft Excel formula. However, it does not work in this sheet's kind of layout. So if you know how to use sum product, you're going to need to go ahead and modify the way this layout looks. For right now, for simplicity, this is the best way to do it if you're running these horizontally this way. Now again, it's just going to be this value times this plus this value times this. And if you had a third or fourth or fifth column, it would be the next value times the weight plus the next value times the weights. And then you're going to add all of those weights together and divide those numbers by it. So in here, I have my weight of 0.8. And since over here I have 1 minus this value, which would be 0.8. If I change this at any given time, say I think now it's closer. I think SaberSim is close to BAT-X, and I'm only going to give them the 60% weight. I'll go ahead and change this one cell, since all of these cells are referencing here. And this one is merely 1 minus this value. We still are at 100%, but we can see our values change. So if I want to say they are equal, we have 6.6. If I want to say that it's actually more of a 0.9, we now have a different value. If I say I want to change this to 0.01, everything else will switch to 99. We get yet another number. So this is a great way to weight things. Now, you don't have to only do it with a formula. There's some neat little trickery that you can do to actually do slider rails. So let's go ahead and pull some of those slider rails in. All right, so there's two different slider rails that we see here. Both of these, if you go into the developer tab. So now that we have our developer tab open, you can come over to insert and you can go ahead and choose this one, which is a scroll bar, or you can come into ActiveX control, which is a scroll bar. If you're doing things with ActiveX, you're going to want design mode enabled, and then that way you can set the properties. So let's go ahead and come back to here. All right, so this one is going to be form. This one is ActiveX. So let's go ahead and look at the form. So when I go ahead and insert, all you have to do is click insert, make your selection for that item, and then draw it on the screen, and it'll plop it on the screen. When you right click, you'll just go ahead and hit format control. This little window will open. It tells you what current value you're on, so you can just default this to 0. Your minimum value will be 0. Your maximum value will be 100. You're going to set your incremental change by 1. Your page change will be 1. And then you'll notice that right above I have this cell right here, D15. That's where it's going to change things. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. So click into the slider bar, and as you see this moving, you see those values changing. So in order to be able to use this slider rail, all you really need to do is instead change this first cell rather than manually changing the weight here. I'm going to go ahead and say this one will equal this cell, the D15, times 0.01. We're timesing it by 0.01 because here it's going to be a whole full number. We need it to be a decimal. So now that we've done that, right, you'll see 0, and we're putting in 0 weight, which means that this is 100%. However, I can click this over to here, and we'll see 89, 89%, and 11%. So now you can start adjusting this with a nice little slide rail. Now the only thing that I would suggest is that you would put this to the right of your data on this lookup sheet. That way you can have tons of rows going down of data. The other one that you can do is again the ActiveX. Now once you put this one in, like I said, you must be in design mode to be able to click it with this 4-way arrow. Once you do click it with the 4-way arrow, you'll click Properties. This Properties window will open. Now in here, it's going to be similar to what we saw with the other modal, but this one has a little bit more detail in here. Linked cell is merely going to be the cell that you're storing the weight information into. Then you're going to have a maximum, which will be 100. You have a minimum, which is going to be 0. Now in here you can change shadows, you can change colors, you can change names. So this one's a little bit more playful and you can do different things with it. So if I wanted the back color to be a off blue, let's go off blue right there, active, right? And I can close that out. So same thing, rather than having this weight point to D15, I'll have it point to D22 or 23, whichever cell that is. Close that, put that one there. Same thing, our formulas are still taking care of everything and we don't have to worry about it. All we have to worry about is this one cell. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn off design mode so I can interact with it. Now what's nice here is I can come in and I can use my slider. Right now if I slide too quickly and I wanted to go to 15, I can actually use these arrows to tick up, and now I'm up to 15. Again, my recommendation is store this onto the right hand side of your sheet. That way you'll have a little bit more flexibility in loading in additional data. So that is it. This is how you create weighted averages. And again, a weighted average is when you're just trying to say, I think that this data or this data is more relevant, but I don't want to completely dismiss the other data. So I'm going to go ahead and assign a weighting criteria to it. And then that way, as I slide this bar over, you'll see that these numbers are being modified and manipulated, and that these values are actually different than what's going to be showing up as the standard average. So as you can see here, 4.7 versus 5.12, right? If we were to bring this all the way back down to here, we can even get closer to that. So that is it. It's relatively simplistic. It's very similar to the Johnny Mo sheet that you are able to see within his video. Now, again, the difference is rather than just using a static average, you now have the capability to weight and blend these different values that you see. That could be yours. It could be from other projections that you're pulling in for free or from paid services and things like that. It doesn't really matter, but what you're doing essentially is still creating a very similar and common document you would use to load into Unabated, run through the simulator, and then go ahead and get your value. So as always, if you have any questions on how to do this, you can reach me in the Unabated Discord. So the great thing about using sheets like this is they're not only used for baseball. You can use it for soccer, for hockey, for basketball, and just about anything you want. Weighted averages are awesome and work really well when you're trying to simulate things and you have different sources of information. You don't know which one's the truth, but you have a good idea on which one might be more accurate. So until next time, happy wagering.